But first, for me it's a rule. If you are arguing for a good cause, you don't need to lie. Facts will speak for themselves. But Labor's plan to divide us by race, to bring in apartheid, an Aboriginal-only parliament written into our constitution, that is not a good cause. And so the first ad released today to push for this Aboriginal-only parliament does not tell the truth at all. Spot the obvious deceit.
I got a story to tell you. It's a good one. It's about how these people, the first people, got a voice.
60,000 years they've been speaking.
Had 363 languages.
But no voice. No say on matters which affected them. It wasn't right.
So, me and your granddad.
Me and your mum.
The whole nation did something about it.
Is that story true?
It could be.
Of course, the idea that Aborigines do not have a voice in the running of this country is a flat-out lie. They do. Most importantly, like every other Australian, they have a vote. In fact, we now have 11 politicians in our federal parliament who identify as Aboriginal. 11. That's 5% of all federal politicians, when Aborigines actually make up just 3.8% of the population. That sure is a say, more than most races. And it's not just that. Outside Parliament, Aborigines also have a huge voice. They have more than 30 big land councils. They have 2,700 Aboriginal corporations. They have a Council of Peaks representing more than 70 top Aboriginal bodies already advising governments. And they have some form of ownership or say over more than a third of the continent. And as you saw from the AFL Grand Final entertainment on Saturday, Aboriginal causes are pushed repeatedly in the public space, ad nauseum, or on our landmarks. Aborigines have a say. They have a huge say, and it's simply a lie to say that they don't. So, what Labor's plan is not to give Aborigines a voice that they don't have already. That's false. Proportionally, they have a voice stronger than most races per person. It's in fact, what Labor's up to is effectively to try to give people who identify as Aboriginal 2 votes when the other 96% of Australians have just 1. To give them their own parliament based on their so-called race. Privilege afforded to no other race. But that wasn't the only falsehood told in the past couple of days about this Aboriginal-only parliament called The Voice. The other was by Linda Burney. She's the Albanese government's Minister for Indigenous Australians. And she told this lie here on Sky News yesterday. I should note, by the way, that Burney's mother was of Scottish background. And Burney was raised by her Scottish great-aunt and uncle. She didn't meet her Aboriginal father until she was 28. And I've discussed this stuff at length with her, Burney. And she's also said on the record that it wasn't until she was about 13 that she did embrace her Aboriginal identity, which to me at least suggests a choice. A choice to identify primarily with one side of her heritage rather than the other. So I have to ask, despite that choice, maybe because of it, why Burney will get 2 votes under her plan for an Aboriginal-only parliament, and most of you get just 1. Why is she so different to you? And it's certainly not that Burney's voiceless. I mean, she's a minister in the federal government, for heaven's sake. Does she really need a second vote as well for an Aboriginal-only parliament so she finally has a voice? Are you kidding me? So this plan is not just racist, it's also unfair. But I said that Burney told an untruth. It was this: dismissing claims that this Aboriginal-only parliament will be able to consider anything really, any issue involving Aborigines. And look, tax policy involves Aborigines. Defence policy involves Aborigines. They're Australians like everyone else. That this plan will let them consider all these kinds of issues and more and advise our real parliament on it. Well, that's nonsense, said Burney on the weekend. That's nonsense. It's going to advise the real parliament on just a few things. And it won't also, she says, be like the old Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which you might recall had to be sacked for corruption.
Things like land rights legislation, things like native title. So it won't be on things like taxation or defence and some of the other nonsense that's been sprouted. So the Voice will be looking at things, and it is like that, and it is an advisory body. ATSIC was a delivery body, and this will not be that.
That's just false. Burney is just making things up. I said she lied. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's just ignorant. First, nowhere in the words that the Albanese government wants to put into the Constitution does it say, oh, and by the way, you know, this Aboriginal-only parliament that we're creating, they can only talk about native title, things like that. Like Burney just said, only native title. It can't talk about tax or defence. Actually, no, you check the words for yourself. They say this voice may make representations to Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. Which matters? It doesn't say any matters at all relating to Aboriginals. Any. There's no limit stated at all in the words Labor will actually put in the Constitution. And secondly, Burney says, oh, look, don't worry. This Aboriginal Parliament is not going to be handing out money or running programs like that corrupt ATSIC did. But again, that's not what the words that Labor will put in the Constitution. Can't be changed. Unless you go for another referendum, can't be changed. That's not what the words Labor will put in the Constitution actually say. Those words say that any future government at any time can give this Aboriginal Parliament the functions and powers it likes. There's not a word about saying it can't actually run anything. Here's what Labor's words actually say. The Parliament shall have power, the real Parliament, shall have power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Which suggests to me that Linda Burney, the minister, is conning voters. And why might that be? Well, I think because the truth is damaging. This Aboriginal-only Parliament, this voice would very quickly get out of control, and Burney does not want you to know that. So, you're being conned by people selling you a racist plan that brings apartheid to Australia. And yet, this makes me so sad for the future of this country. You know? Despite the fact that this plan is obviously racist, despite the fact that it's sold with lies, despite the fact there's no evidence this Aboriginal-only Parliament would make any difference in fixing Aboriginal poverty and violence. The people pushing it don't talk about poverty and violence. Despite all that, the latest poll in the Sydney Morning Herald shows huge support, 64%. For this Aboriginal-only Parliament, 64 with the majority support in every single state. And if that is correct, then Labor's plan will be passed in a referendum before the next election. This country will officially become racist. And one reason for that, I have to say, is that the Liberals, they do not have the guts to say no to this plan. They do not have the integrity to say they are against racism. Now, last Friday, the opposition leader suggested he might not be totally on board with this new tribalism, but he made it seem a question of just process, procedure, functions, detail, not a question of fundamental principle. Indeed, he suggested that if Labor tweaks some details, he might support it.
I think there are questions that reasonably should be answered, and we're approaching it in good faith, and I hope that the Prime Minister can provide those answers.
The Liberals can only save us from this plan by saying no. This is a matter of principle, of conscience. We are anti-racism. This country does not divide people by race. We're against that. The Liberals should be the party of individualism, not the party of tribes, identity politics. The Liberals should say no. It is a matter of the deepest conviction. But the longer that it waits to make that argument, the more half-hearted and insincere it will seem. If it's of deep conviction, why haven't you said so already that you're against it? And by the time it does, maybe then, it will all be too late.